In some sense, you could say that Canada is now the front lines of the resistance against the United States of America. That is a sentence I never thought I would say in my life. 10 years ago, it would have seemed absurd to say something like that. Even 2 years ago, a lot of people would have been like, what are you talking about? But today, I believe it to be true. And I think some of you will agree with me. Whether you do or you don't, I'm going to make that case today for what I mean by that statement. But first, I want to point out an obvious truth that needs to be stated. There are a lot of cultural similarities between Canada and the United States. As much as Canadians might try to deny that these days, from an outside perspective, it's very obvious. You can probably tell by the lack of snow around me. I'm not in Canada right now. I'm in Turkey. And when I introduce myself to people here, they often ask where I'm from. I'll say I'm Canadian. But sometimes they'll guess. They'll say, "Oh, are you American?" I've even had people say, "So what state are you from?" And I say, well, I'm the state that's above them that's actually an independent country. I'm from that state. And then they'll kind of say, oh, sorry, Anyway, from the outside, it's pretty obvious that there's cultural similarities. And yet, that doesn't mean we can't be a resisting force. Cultural similarities does not imply that you are politically aligned or that you are destined to have the same future or anything like that. Look at places like Russia and Ukraine. Look at places like China and Taiwan. These are places that from the outside seem very similar, but have very different ideas, very different values that they stand for. I'll focus on Russia and Ukraine a little bit because it needs to be said that before the full-scale invasion of 2022, they were like brothers. Slavic brothers is how they would describe themselves. They were more similar than Canada and the US, in fact, given that they were both part of the Soviet Union. And so, Canada and the US, at some point, yes, we were both settlers and newly arrived European, often British settlers, but we were never together. We were just kind of on a similar path, you could say. And so, I guess my point here is that similarities does not imply that you are aligned with everything, or that you can't become, in some sense, enemies, or even enemies on the battlefield. I hope that we will never reach that point between Canada and the United States, for many reasons. Obviously, the fact that the United States has the world's biggest military would not bode well for Canada. But we do have a leader in the United States who's currently not above threatening other countries with taking their land by any means necessary. He's done this now to Greenland. He's done this to Canada. He recently did this to Iceland, almost by accident, it seemed like. There's some uncertainty if he was actually threatening Iceland, or he's just so senile and demented at this point that he's confusing the lands. He doesn't know Iceland or Greenland. Fun fact about that, as I understand it, Iceland and Greenland were given their names because Iceland is actually much more green than Greenland. Like, Greenland is primarily ice and snow, whereas Iceland in the summer is quite nice. So as I understand it, those names were given to confuse the Vikings back long time ago, so that the invaders would accidentally go to the wrong one. Well, maybe that same technique has now worked on Donald Trump so many centuries later. But I digress. I'm getting a bit sidetracked here. The point is, the days of Vikings invading foreign lands may be behind us, but there's one leader who seems to still operate in that framework, Donald Trump. And as much as people like to joke about things and see him as this big meme and someone to laugh at and poke jokes about, the more he moves in this authoritarian direction, the more we realize that it was never a joke to begin with, that he was entirely serious about all this stuff. And so, where does that leave Canada? Well, at the same big Davos event where Trump was confusing Iceland and Greenland, meanwhile, a guy named Mark Carney, recently elected Prime Minister of Canada, replacing Justin Trudeau, who stepped down, Carney gave his first big speech on the international stage. And you could say it was a historic moment for Canada, and maybe for the world, depending on how the next few years turn out. This could be remembered as the moment when internationally we all said enough is enough. Because there had been a lot of sucking up to Trump recently, a lot of boot kissing, a lot of literally, like, Qatar is like gifting him airplanes, and like everywhere he goes, people giving him the FIFA Peace Prize, like the fact that he was a serious candidate for the Nobel Peace Prize, and then he threw a tantrum when he didn't get it. Like, this is not normal behavior. This is how you treat a toddler who wants some candy bar at the grocery store, and mommy and daddy say no, and he starts crying and kicking, and then you think, oh, should we just give him the candy to shut him up? That's the level of maturity we're dealing with here with the President of the United States. And first of all, I mean, it's rather troubling that a lot of Americans are not seeming to see it this way. Some of them, like the fine people who seem to find videos like this and comment in my comment section, I'm not oblivious to the fact that some Americans are very much awake here and feeling the full pressure of the democracy they're living in kind of breaking at the seam, like seeming to bend and break in two, potentially. But a lot of people are just still like, they're just like, I checked out, I don't watch the news anymore. Europe's mad at us, well, what else is new? Canada's mad at us, well, sorry buddy, like that's not going to change anything in my life down here in California. I think a lot of Americans just aren't. Well, a lot of Americans have never been very conscious of what's going on outside of their borders. But they may have to be if this resistance continues to grow. And Mark Carney made a speech where he basically said, we need to stop pretending things are normal. We need to collectively wake up and stop pretending like the international institutions are working. And the funny thing is, he never named Trump or the United States, but it was clear that he was speaking about them with every sentence. He talked about how it's no longer a system where we collaborate and work together. It's a system where might is right, where the big countries come and bully the small ones with economic tariffs or by force if needed. And he basically said, all of us so-called smaller countries, some of which are not that small, by the way. Canada, we're smaller than the United States, but we're still like, top 10 economy in the world. England, France, Germany, these are not small countries. And together, we're not small at all. So what Carney seems to be calling for is more of a united resistance. And it's starting. It's starting. People are resisting Trump. Resisting Trump's new, what's it called? The Board of Peace. I mean, Trump seems to be ready to throw out the United Nations and create his own Board of Peace. Just like, by the way, the United States just officially left the World Health Organization, in case you missed that story as well. There's so much happening these days. It's easy to miss monumental changes. And I suppose that's the point, isn't it? That you just hit us with so many news stories that you quickly forget about things. Like those inconvenient Epstein files that Trump was named in. Oh, we're just going to invade another country. Oh, we're just going to crash the stock market. Oh, everyone forgot about the fact that I was committing crimes with underage children. Yeah, it's the deeper you think about it, the more it becomes clear that this whole situation isn't something to laugh about, and it never was. It's actually deeply toxic. And this toxicity has been bubbling up in American culture for a long time. And I'm not naive enough to say that we don't have that in Canada, that we don't have corruption problems, that we don't have, how do I say, like, we're not a racial paradise over here. We have racists, we have sexists, we have different groups of people who don't get along. But in many ways, the parts of Canada that I'm proudest of are in opposition to the United States. We do have two official languages. On parle français et on parle anglais, you know? Now, a lot of us are not so good at the French, myself included. But we embrace that as part of our identity. We don't, I mean, the United States should actually probably have two official languages right by now. English and Spanish, if you ask me. And that's as someone who's taken a lot of trips to the United States recently. I've been to Los Angeles, San Francisco. Both Spanish names, by the way. Los Angeles, right? The Angels is what it means. San Francisco, Saint Francis, right? like these were Spanish-speaking places. This was Mexican territory once upon a time. And so the fact that more and more Latinos and Latinas are now living there, and more people are speaking Spanish. I mean, when I'm in Miami, there's whole neighborhoods that don't speak English. Like, this is just a fact. They don't speak English past, like, hello, goodbye, thank you. Like, I met those people when I was down there. And so, at this point, I think linguistically, there should be more to recognize the important role that Spanish speakers play in the United States and have always played there. But instead of adopting a second official language, Trump did the opposite. He officially said, we have one language, English. And now he's doing the best he can to have his special force, ICE, go around rounding up people who just happen to be the wrong skin color, who just happen to look like they're from a different place. Show us your papers. Show us your proof to be here. Oh, and even if you have papers, we might still throw you in a detention center just because we feel like it. Yeah, the events, particularly the events in Minnesota right now, are quite horrific. That's another story that I won't go into right now just because, well, like I said, there's just so much. There's so much. This could be a 2-hour video if I wanted it to be, and I wouldn't run out of things to say. But the point is, the world seems to be ready to actively resist this. And I think Canada is the front lines of this resistance. First of all, because as I started by saying, we have a lot of cultural similarities. And so people might think we're Americans, and we're being more prone to distinguish ourselves and say, no, we're Canadian. And this is what my country stands for. And this is how it is in opposition to what the US government currently stands for. And so, I guess what I would say is, sometimes your similarities actually make it more obvious how you're different. Do you know what I'm saying? no one confuses Japan with the United States of America. There's too much that's different. But when you're often perceived as being like America, like the United States, it makes you reflect on the ways you're actually different. Now, the second reason we're the resistance is geographical. I mean, we share our only land border is with the United States, and it's I believe it's the longest land border in the world, actually, the U.S.-Canada border. It's at least the longest peaceful land border. There've never been it's never been guarded by armies or anything like that. It's never been it's never been the well, I should say never, because in early history, I suppose there were some conflicts between the Canadians and the Americans. But we're talking so early, you may as well say the British, to be honest. But the point is, in modern history, it's been a symbol of peace. And Canadian and American politicians have both spoken about it as being, you know, a model for the world. When I was a kid, you didn't even need a passport. Prior to 9/11, September 11th, you didn't need a passport to go between Canada and the US. That all changed. And now we're so far beyond that point that it's inconceivable to get back there. It would take a national change. It would take some level of change that isn't even imaginable at this point. Or from the American perspective, it might take us actually becoming the 51st state. So I guess that's another reason we are part of the resistance, the active threats that we've been faced with. We're not just bordering the US, we're actively receiving threats from their leader. And finally, as I was saying, the fact that we finally have a leader who's willing to speak clearly and bravely, I would say, about these issues in a way that a lot of the world is not prepared to do. But sometimes you just need a spark, you know, a little spark to light the match, and then to light the candle, and then to light all the candles, and suddenly you realize that the resistance is much stronger than you thought. So I'm proud to be a Canadian right now, to be part of this resistance to the American rise in fascism, is what I would call it. And I think Americans who are also on our side here, not, you know, obviously not Americans aren't Canadian by identity, but maybe they need a term, just like we have MAGA for the people who are fully on board. Is there a term for people who are fully off board? Because I don't think Democrat is enough. I don't think you can say, oh, well, I'm a Democrat, I don't believe in any of this. Because I think there's a lot of young people, maybe old people too, I don't know. I just know a lot of young people who were not a fan of Joe Biden or Kamala Harris or any of that either. But they're deeply opposed to what's happening now. So I think it's bigger than politics. I think there has to be a term for people who are against all of this. And maybe it's just a sane human being. Maybe that's what we should start calling him. I don't know if anyone has any ideas, or if that term already exists and I'm just forgetting it. Let me know. The sun has started to shine here in Turkey. It was a rainy day, but now the sun is out. A little reminder, perhaps, that even in the darkest of times, there is light up ahead. And I hope this video has brought a little bit of light to your day. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.